Okay, welcome to the April 2023 Planetarium Zoom seminar. And today we have Michael McConville. He's the IPS president, the Dome Dialogues founder, and director of customer outreach for Evans and Sutherland and Spitz. And he's speaking on the fundamentals of visual storytelling. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Michael.
Alan, thank you so much, and it really is it's a pleasure to be here. I think this is my second PPA seminar, so really excited to be able to share this one in particular. This is a presentation that grew out of a presentation I first gave probably about 5 years ago, and as much as what we use, like the technology that we have available to us, as important as that is. At a very, very fundamental level, knowing how to communicate to our audiences through color and shape and position transcends all of that. Doesn't matter if you have a digital system or you use slide projectors or PowerPoint, or you have a soap can with holes punched in it. One of the key aspects about all of this is that there are fundamentals to how humans process things visually. And that's really what this presentation is all about, getting to those basics and really giving everybody, regardless of their technology, an opportunity to tell stories in the best way possible. So the basis of this, of course, is that in the Dome, we have our 5 senses, and some of them are underutilized in a planetarium setting, and some of them, of course, are essential to how we present in the Dome. So smell and taste are usually senses that we don't often connect to most planetarium shows. If you did a wine and cheese pairing and a planetarium show, now you've incorporated smell and taste, perhaps. But in a day-to-day planetarium setting, smell and taste are senses that we tend to not use very often. We often bring in sound and touch, the tactile part of a presentation, if you're working with students or audiences that might be hard of vision. That touch really allows them to accentuate the entire planetarium experience. And of course, you can't have a planetarium show without sound, whether it's your voice being delivered or it's the background music, it's the soundtrack that swells, that ebbs and flows with the feelings. Every single show, though, every time we're in the planetarium, we are focusing almost entirely on sight. And it works out pretty well for us. It is sight that the human brain is able to process the most of. So our brains can process more visual stimuli than it can any of the other senses. And that's something that as planetarium educators, as people who are making content, we can take advantage of. And so that's exactly what we're going to try to talk about today. Get a theoretical basis for all of this. We have information that needs to make its way to our audience. And in between, we have this very important role in taking that data and doing things to it and shaping it in such a way so that the audience isn't overwhelmed by the information, and what they receive from it is something useful. They can walk out of the planetarium with a better understanding of the universe, perhaps, than where they started from. We can do that by first analyzing the data. What is it that we're actually looking at? Then, as planetarians, we need to interpret that data. What does it actually mean? And so often we forget that we translate information, we translate the universe to our audiences in everything that we do. From there, we get to use our expertise. This is about curating the experience. What do they need to know? What is the best experience that we can put together? And then we need to put it on a dome. Now we visualize it. So we've made our way from raw information to our audience through this series. And now, since we're visualizing our data, we can make information as easy to understand as possible. That's the key, the basest fundamental of visual storytelling is make your information as easy to understand as we can. There are, of course, a number of good reasons why we might want to teach and educate in the dome space. Some of it is, I think we would dare say, anecdata, rather than something that's been extensively researched. But over and over again, we tend to see that the dome environment provides very positive psychological and physiological effects. One of those is known as saccades. And so these are generally considered to be like rapid eye movements. The way that we look, and if you look up, you look to the left, you look to the right, oftentimes that's connected to how we are processing something in our mind. If you look up and to the left, we tend to do that when we try to recall. So somebody is telling a story from memory and they're looking off in sort of that upward direction. That tends to be what humans do when they're trying to recall, to go through those memory banks and find something to construct that memory from. If we look up and to the right, that tends to be when we are constructing those memories. So we recall up and to the left, we construct up and to the right. And even that can give us a sense of, well, where do I position something on the dome? When we construct memories and when we recall them, we tend to look up. You're in a planetarium where you're looking up almost all the time. That's great for constructing and recalling those memories, for providing
Michael?
context. Yes.
I I hesitate to interrupt at this point, but does it matter if you're right-handed or left-handed, which way you're looking?
Usually not. That's an excellent question. But as a left-handed person, I tend to do. I've looked at this and thought, okay, when I'm telling a story, it tends to be up and to the left, my left, not necessarily your left in the Zoom, but it is independent of handedness, at least the way we understand it right now. So, fantastic question.
Also, I was going to add, it's
Hey, Andy.
it's a good plug for unidirectional seating.
Yeah, or very, very dynamic, concentric sort of use case. So, like, if you can really use Museum of Science in Boston does a great job of this. If you can really use the space, now everybody can have this effect, but in a unidirectional setup, yes, much, much more likely that we're able to pinpoint people where we want them to be. The second overall learning feel that we get is this idea of the cathedral effect. Again, more anecdata than true research. It's planetarium stuff. We should probably be researching more of it. But it posits that in most cases, if you are in a learning environment with high ceilings, that tends to make people more creative. So if they don't feel like there's an 8-foot ceiling above them, but they've got a 28-foot ceiling above them, that tends to make people more creative. And if we're in the dome, we're giving a live and interactive show, and we want our students to be creative in their answers or in their analysis of what we're showing them, the cathedral effect would tend to agree with that and give us a sense that the dome is a great place for people to learn. So from there, we start to build out a better understanding of what visualization actually is. And you can go very, very precise with visualization. You know, the work that our great visualizers do, the Ryan Wyatts and Mark Subarows of the community. But this is visualization, again, at its most fundamental. This is taking data and interpreting it in a way that's visual. We think about big data, lots of little data points and dot clouds and things up on the dome. Bringing in even more. This is accessible visualization for everyone. And this, of course, I think is probably my favorite part of the whole presentation, which is going through visualizations that get you thinking in a different way. We are bombarded with visual stimuli all the time, and a lot of it we process at a subconscious level. So what do we got to do? First thing, we want to make data fancy, as we see right here. Big data can be made beautiful and fancy and great. It can be exceptionally simple, or it can be extremely complex. So here we are from, you'll remember all of these. These are all fantastic uses of data visualization. But here we go. First, what will NPR consider this afternoon? All the things. It's dumb, but it's a great visualization that you're not going to forget. What if we wanted to talk about fry consumption by month? This is a bar graph. It's nothing real here, except the fact that the bars are made of French fries. And you can, of course, instill that in your audience's minds by visualizing it in a way that's unexpected. This is probably a bit of a niche visualization. These are Google searches for the name Rebecca Black in the years 2014 through 2018. And if you look at the data as it's laid out here, you'll notice that on Fridays, these searches for Rebecca Black seem to spike. For those of you who may not be aware, who did not participate in the internet culture of the mid-2010s, Rebecca Black released a viral song on YouTube called Friday. And on Friday, people search for Rebecca Black because they want to listen to her song Friday. It's not super important to the to planetarium audiences. I get that. But again, this is visualization that is telling a story, and that's what we want to do. This is a map of the Earth in which all of the lines are connecting flight paths. There are no continents on here, but because of the way that hub to hub and city to city flights go, we can interpret this data because we know where the areas that there's nothing, say the South Pacific or the South Atlantic, and where we see a lot of this data, Europe, North America, China, matches up with some of our existing knowledge. This has context that we pull from that only needs the flight paths to be able to tell this compelling story of, well, it looks like there's a huge, huge number of flights that originate from the East Coast of North America and make their way into Europe. And you could go and zoom in on this map and see all of the big hubs, New York and Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. and Atlanta and Miami. The data is actually now building the visualization for us.
What are the colors about?
I think that was completely by the artists themselves. I can't tell you what the colors are supposed to stand for, but Alan, a very important point as we move forward, you got to have it mean something. You've spent some of your time trying to decode this data because it has colors attached to it, and you're trying to figure out what those colors mean. That takes away the time that you might have to decode other parts of this visualization. So we'll get to that in a little bit. This is the same. This is Facebook connections in the year 2010. As it was 13 years ago, as it is today, one of the things that should jump out right away is that this looks like a map of the world with one exception. What's missing from this map?
North Korea.
For one, and most of China. So for a country that in 2010 would have had 1.1, maybe 1.2 billion people, of course, Facebook not allowed through the Great Firewall of China. And that means that the connections are much, much lower than they would be in places like North America and Europe, in which case the United States, those connections can basically map to the cities and roads of the US one-to-one. There's enough.
It could almost be a map of light pollution if it wasn't for China too.
Start telling the stories here. Like, yeah, it's either they're disconnected because of the internet, they might be disconnected because of economy, or where we have people in sort of the Western world, we would tend to find people who are using Facebook, especially in 2010. This is from the Tweet Map project. These are for the last 8 months or so, searching for hashtags and tweets for that include planetarium in them. And you can kind of get a sense, a lot more sort of in the eastern part of the United States where we have a higher density of people. We've got a nice little clump in San Francisco. I assume that has to do with like Ryan Wyatt or Dan Tell or the very extensive California Academy of Sciences social media. There's a very large clump in Chicago, which we will just say is Mike Smale and only Mike Smale. But you could do this anywhere in the world over an extensive period of time and see how data is changing. This is a simple visualization, but as we drill down into it, we get more and more data from it. This I just included because it's incredibly pretty. This is a visualization of the 21,000 connections between Star Wars characters based on their level of force sensitivity and where they stand on the force spectrum. So those that are blue tend to be towards the light side of the force. Red is towards the dark or Sith side of the force. And then the other colors are people that kind of sit in the middle or are neutral. This is a massive visualization. And if you zoom in all the way, you get the connections themselves and you can see which characters. I just thought it was incredibly pretty. This is 21,000 data points that are connected to each other and color coded by how those connections are built. So again, very, very cool. This is one of my favorite ones. August 21st, 2017, the Google searches in New York. So the blue line is solar eclipse and the orange line is for my eyes hurt. Yeah, exactly. So again, it is 2 data points, 2 lines of data that actually tell a very, very fun story if we're willing to look into them. Again, great visualizations. This is population density in Europe, not put together by color or some sort of spectrum, but by the height. So you can see where in southern England, there's a very, very high population density. You can see the major cities, Paris and Brussels and Berlin. You go into Italy. Spain, for example, has a lot of land in which there aren't many people. You go to Portugal and you'll notice that almost all of the population density is along the coast where you would expect people to be. So again, it's visualizing data in different and new ways. This image is 8 kilobytes in size. It is the entire mRNA strand of COVID. So to define COVID as a virus in a computer image, you need 8 kilobytes of data. And that's what would be visualized here. So this image is a visual representation of the last 3.5 years of human existence and the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, we don't necessarily think of viruses as being binary or something that we could put in a visual way like this. This is the representation of that. And then the last of the sort of fun and interesting things to get your mind going. This is a map in which the yellow states, it is legal to own a pet raccoon. So I'm currently in Madison, Wisconsin for the GLIPA WIMPS meeting. It is legal to own a raccoon here in the state of Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Florida, of course, and in the blue states, it is not legal to own a raccoon. So just keep that in mind if you're looking for a new pet as we move forward. Sometimes we get a lot of data at once, and it's a great way to be funny and to connect with people. This is a visualization of the trustworthiness of beards. There is no real data here, but it's fun and you'll memorize it. We'll zoom in. The most trustworthy of beards is the full beard, followed very closely by the Carl. You can see there is the philosopher. And then moving from the very trustworthy beards to the more mildly trustworthy, you can see the full mustache or the Wilford Brimley. Sideburns would be considered a neutral beard. And then you can start seeing the unsavory, threatening, dangerous, the werewolf, that would be an extremely dangerous facial hair, to disastrous, the John Waters, the Joe Jackson, and of course there on the far right, the Hitler. So again, no real data here, but it is a very fun way for us to look at a story and visualize it in this way. Why is all this important? Well, it's because we only have so much mental processing power when people are in our domes. The amount of time they need to decode what they're seeing will be invariably tied to how much they are able to understand in that moment. So if they're looking at a visualization for 5 seconds, but it takes them 4 seconds to figure out what they're looking at, they've only got 1 second to take it in. So this is a great way of thinking, okay, leave your visualizations on the dome longer so that people can really take them in. But if we can make visualizations that are easier to decode, they will understand more and take more from the presentation. A good example of this would be something like this chart of cosmic exploration. If you have 10 seconds and you show this on the dome, people will see some planets. They will assume that they are planets because they've seen Saturn, they know the rings, and that's context that they can process right away. But there's no time for them to go through the entirety of this visualization. Print this out and put it on a wall and give people an indefinite amount of time to process it, then we're in really good shape. They can take a lot of time to decode and get a lot of understanding from it. But in a planetarium show where we're limited by the length of the presentation and oftentimes by the length of time we can actually leave something on the dome before it just sits there for too long, we want to make these visualizations as accessible as possible. Maybe we bring that in a little bit here. This is a visualization of the Apollo missions. You can tell that there is the Earth and the moon. It is clean and very, very pretty, but there's a lot, there's density here. Again, this is not necessarily something you would want to put on the dome for people to understand, but it is something that you might want to have, give them access to if you want them to have more time to decode. So when things are static, you can take more time to decode and hence understand more. So when we're in our domes, what we're trying to do is minimize decoding time and maximize understanding time. And that gets a little bit easier when we take advantage of the things that people already know. So this is where you all get to have your entire lifetime's worth of visualization just thrown right out the window. This is color theory at its best. So we'll start here. This sign right here means what? It means stop.
Stop.
It doesn't have the word stop on it, but you know that a red octagon with a white stripe around it for almost everyone means stop. Red means stop. Red means danger. Human evolution would tell us that if you see red, that's probably the color of blood. And if you're seeing blood, something not good is happening. And so we tend to have this feeling about red of like, red is dangerous, red, we must stop. It's not a good feeling when we see this stop sign, but we instantaneously knew it. There is no decoding time necessary. The context of this is that red in an octagon shape is a stop sign. And so I will stop even if it doesn't say it on the sign. Let's go to something like maybe one of history's most famous pictures, the Pillars of Creation from Hubble in '95. Is this a true color image?
Absolutely not.
It is not. And there are reasons why the Hubble palette, as it is created right now, is the way it is, why we've connected certain colors, red, green, and blue, and corresponding to wavelengths of light or styles of light. In this case, sulfur, hydrogen alpha, and oxygen 3. Now, this was a decision made arbitrarily by someone decades ago. That decision affects every single astrophotograph you have seen since. And so our understanding of what the universe looks like is defined by, for example, this arbitrary palette. I have sulfur or hydrogen alpha data. I'm going to apply that to red and to green wavelengths, or red and green channels, respectively. Someone made an arbitrary decision, and now everything else is affected by it. So arbitrary decisions about visualizations are made on your behalf all the time. Let's go through a few more of these. So now we have a series of squares. This will be the next few slides. And I want you to tell me what these colors mean. Why do we have these 7 squares up on the screen right now?
With something to do with weather?
Go even broader. So importantly, this is a natural progression of color.
Like spectrum.
Yeah, it's Roy G. Biv. Yeah, so this is red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. This is as close to a natural progression of colors as we can get. So this feels comfortable. We've seen a rainbow, and we know that this occurs in nature. That's good. Let's go on. What about this progression of colors? The astronomers should be able to pick this one out. Thank you, Eric. This is the stellar classification. So these are stellar classes, with red being the coolest of these stars on the left, and blue, those O stars, being the hottest. That is a natural progression until humans go and mess it up. When we look at these temperatures, coolest is on the left, hottest is on the right. Then, after we've taught our third graders about stellar classes, maybe we're like, you know what? These kids are smart. They probably can understand a Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. And in the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, the hottest stars are on the left and the coolest stars are on the right. And that's confusing. It's made more confusing by the fact that, at least with stars, it's a natural progression. But our students, our 45-year-old adults in the dome, let's be clear, have been seeing arbitrary color temperature spectrums their entire life and didn't know it. Something like this. Mary, we'll go back to you. What do you think this represents?
Weather.
This is the Weather Channel's temperature scale. It is completely arbitrary. And if you live in, if you lived in the Great Lakes, you watch the Weather Channel, you see that pink and it's like, oh, that's going to be cold. But then I see blue, and blue is still cold. But then you go to the hottest, and that's red. But in nature, red is cooler than blue. But we see this far more often. And that means that for our audiences, this is the context they're going to pull from. There is zero connection in these colors to the temperatures that we actually feel. But we have been contextualized to make sure that this is how we see it. So when you see red on a weather map, well, that means it's going to be hot. And if you see blue, it's going to be cold. And then you ask students in kindergarten, red stars are what? Red stars are hot. And what about blue stars? Oh, well, blue stars are way hotter, and it doesn't work anymore. And now we've confused them, and we've given them way more decoding time than they need. That's a problem. Let's make it easier on them. Let's do this again. Mary, I'm going to go back to you. What does this progression of colors indicate?
I'm not sure about this one.
It's right up here. It's right where you've been the last 3 minutes.
Yep.
Is it also weather?
This is standard Doppler radar reflectivity. Because green, of course, is the color we think of when it's raining. It's not. Water is not green, except if you saw green on a map that has to do with weather, the first thing you think of is, oh, it's going to be a light rain today. And then it gets more into when it's white, it's like that's the highest reflectivity, but usually right before the white is a super dark purple, which doesn't make any sense except that somebody decided that it did. So this is an arbitrary color connection that, again, we have to fight back. We have to contextualize against these things. And when we make our visualizations, arbitrary stuff is difficult to understand unless it's been drilled into you for years. Natural is where things get a little bit easier. This is a natural color progression. It should reflect what it's actually showing. Anybody want to take a guess? Eric Johnson, I'm going to throw this one at you.
Oh, did I actually turn on my camera? Wow. I got nothing.
What goes from green to white in nature?
I guess we're just looking at vegetation versus terrain coverage here.
It's elevation.
Elevation.
It's exactly right. It's a natural progression that I think somebody had mentioned. I saw this on Facebook. The MOLA map from Mars. is not a natural color progression. And you have to decode it and figure out, is that a mountain or is that a basin? For astronomers, we know better, but the public doesn't. And so if they're taking all that time to decode, they're not understanding. So lower elevations, we would usually see greenery. You move up and you get to the point where there's the timberline, and then you get up to the very top and you should see glaciers and snow. So this is a natural progression of colors. And then, you know, things you're not supposed to talk about at planetarium seminars, religion and politics. So we're going to talk politics. And really, it's about how you use color and data to tell the story that you want. So, of course, we're all familiar with these styles of maps. This is the presidential election results from 2020. You can see that blue is Joe Biden, the Democrat, and red was Donald Trump, the Republican, except before the 1960s, red almost always represented Democrats and blue almost always represented Republicans. But somebody made an arbitrary decision to change it, and now we deal with it. But I see Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, states where there were very, very little separation in the votes. But this gives us a binary. You either won it or the other guy did. That's an excellent question, Mary. The electoral votes for Nebraska and Maine are not distributed in their entirety to the winner of the state. You win some if you win the state, and then you have to win the individual electoral districts. So for our international folk who are like, why? Welcome to America. Then we can take those colors and we can get a little bit more data. We can tell a better story because now it's a spectrum. There is a continuum. A dark blue state is very solidly Democratic, but a light blue state just as barely. And so you can see places like North Carolina and Georgia are far more 50-50 than someplace like Washington, D.C., for example, which was like 89% Democratic. The most Republican state, the state of Wyoming, Trump won by about 45 or 50 points. And the most Democratic state, I believe, was Maryland, where Biden won by about 35 points. And this scale gives us a better understanding of what's happening. But if you really want to drill down, if you want to better understand this, go further into the data. Now this is by county. So you can see that in red states, there are big blue areas, and in blue states, there's some big red areas. California is definitely a Democratic state, but if you go in the valley, you go towards Sacramento or the northern part of the state, it is decidedly not. And this gives us some insight into that story. The next kind of logical step here would be to take this and make it population-based. And so you'd see these huge areas in which there's lots of people, and then there's a much wider area, the Great Plains, essentially, in which they are extremely red, but there aren't a lot of people. And that's, again, a deeper story that we can tell in the visualizations. So remember, the great cliche, lies, damn lies, and statistics. Visualization is it obscures everything. And so you can tell whatever story you want with your visualizations. Usually it doesn't involve election returns, so that's usually pretty good when it comes to astronomy. Tell the most accurate story you can as effectively as possible. So all that getting us to the point of, all right, how do we make good decisions and how do we showcase things in the dome? Color would be one way we do that all the time. There are 3 ways in which you can use color to tell a story. The first is through hue, and so that is actually the change in the color. Saturation, which takes a color and you can see how much white is added to it. So if you desaturate something, you are adding white to that color. But you can see from saturation rectangle 1 to the white rectangle in the second, that looks like a natural progression. Our minds can interpret that pretty well. Same thing with brightness. If you want to change the brightness of an object, in this case, we would be adding black. So you have your purple there at the beginning, And as you continue to add black to that color, you have now created a spectrum. This is really important if you're trying to show the differences in a single series of data. So if we were talking about this in sort of the election returns from previous, all right, from super, super bright red all the way to either a darker red or a lighter red, this is a natural progression that our minds read well and we should utilize in our visualizations. Instead of pulling 5 or 6 colors and hoping we can somehow explain to our audiences why these 5 or 6 colors mean anything to them, let's go with the natural progressions that are much easier for us to decode. So if you're building a visualization, saturation and brightness changes are far more effective than changing the color. Go ahead and use that same color scape. Also means you're far less likely to have issues with color blindness, because even colorblind individuals can see the difference in saturation and brightness of a single color source. So instead of red and green, which might look identical, saturation and brightness will pop out. Okay, so that's color theory in like 15 minutes. That's an entire semester in graphic design, but at least we're thinking about colors in a different way. Then we have data and we want to categorize it. I want to tell a story with the data in front of me. There will only ever be 5 ways of categorizing data. You can try to figure out a 6th way. There isn't. These are the 5. They're known as the hat racks, and you can remember them by the LATCH acronym: location, alphabetical, time, category, and hierarchy. So if we were to use a data set, so here's a data set, we're going to say stars visible to the naked eye. So how would we categorize that data set? In location, perhaps it's where it is in the sky. What constellation is it a part of? Alphabetical. Acrux would be at the top and Zubin el Janubi definitely down there at the bottom. All other stars in between. Time. Maybe not the best thing for stars in the sky unless you want to think about right ascension, in which case, is this star at 0 hour or 2 hour or 8? That's location as well, overlap. Category. Is it a red star, a blue star, a white star, a variable star, a double star? Any category you want. And then something like hierarchy. This one should be pretty simple. What's a way that we would categorize stars by hierarchy? I mean, we do it already, so this one should be pretty easy.
The brightness.
Magnitude.
Yeah.
Temperature.
We can say that Sirius is the brightest nighttime star, and then Canopus is number 2, and then we work our way down. I think Alpha Centauri is 3 and Arcturus is 4. But that's your hierarchy, and you can figure out whatever hierarchy you want. That's the great thing about a single data set. You now have multiple stories that you can tell by categorizing them in different ways. Then, when we put things together on the dome, where we place them in relation to one another oftentimes imparts more meaning than we expect it to. This is what's known as the proximity effect. And right now, there are 3 sort of orangish, we'll call them peach. We've got 9 peach circles. And if you look at this, your brain will likely read this as a 3x3 matrix. That these 9 dots are related to each other. Nothing else has told you that they are related to one another at all. You are just making this assumption because that's what humans do. This is how we decode things. Until we move them apart from one another in such a way that your brain will decide at some point that you cannot pinpoint that these become 3 columns instead of 9 connected dots. Somewhere along those lines, it's now 3 columns. Where you put things on a dome in relation to one another imparts more meaning than you could possibly imagine. Let's do the same thing, but we'll do it in a different axis. Now At some point, your brain reads this as 3 rows of dots rather than 9 together. So if you put 2 things very close together in the dome on the screen, our audiences will assume that they're related, because that's what that's our instinct as human beings, is to think that things that are close together are related to one another and things that are far apart are not. That's how the proximity effect works. Take advantage of it in your dome. If you want people to think about certain things as being together, put them together. So if you've got pictures on a dome and you put one at east and one at west, you might think, oh, it's very clear that these are related to one another. And our audiences will go, all right, so they're 180 degrees apart. They have no connection at all. You put them together at the front of the dome. Now they have some sort of shared meaning. This expands out when we start thinking about visual space. So you got to think about this dome. It's this huge immersive canvas that we get to use. Remember that that canvas is huge, and where you put things imparts importance on them. So you've got a digital system and you put a caption right at the horizon line. To people in your dome, more than likely they will think that that is a caption, or it's not terribly important, or if it's off to the side, it's definitely not important. We talk about sweet spots and front of dome for a reason. Things that are in the front of the dome are important. Things that are behind you in a unidirectional dome are not. They might be, but our audiences don't know that. We have to tell them that. And if we let them engage the space and play with the space, if things start to move around, we move people's focus around the dome. Now what we've done is increase the size of the canvas that we get to play with and still have them understand what we're showing. Same thing here. If I put something at the bottom right of a PowerPoint slide, I have to actively call that out, because you know that top center is where headings go. No, that's just how we've accepted text on a slide to be. And remember this: if something is static, that's great. But if something moves, if anything on your dome moves, it must be important. It's one of the great things about planetariums is if you make something move, people will immediately gravitate towards that. It could be like one star, but let's go back a couple of million years, and we've got the precursors to humans up in the trees, and you descend at night. You got to go pick some berries, and you might find a small animal. We don't have great night vision, but we have exceptional motion vision. So you're walking around in the high grass, you see something out of the side of your eye, that peripheral motion, and immediately you jump and say, all right, I know that's there. I saw that movement. That movement must be important. It could be my mate. It could be my child. It could be a tiger. We don't know. Humans instinctually are attracted to motion. When things move, we like it. Why do you think babies stare up at mobiles for hours at a time? Because it's fun. Babies are dumb. Let's just be clear here. They got to learn to become humans, and things that move, those things are important. You shake a rattle, or you bounce them on your knee, or you watch a moving picture. These are the things we like. That's what humans feel very comfortable with. Move things in your dome, but move them slowly so people don't throw up, of course. Very, very important. But movement will make things feel important. This slide has the potential to be the most triggering of all of the slides of the presentation. This is all about patterns and consistency. And if you look carefully, there's one square that's just going to bother some people. It's ever so slightly out of rotation. That is a 1 degree rotation on that square. But because, again, humans instinctually look towards patterns, it's pareidolia, if you've heard about that one before, the ability for us to see things where they are not, seeing faces in a piece of toast or shapes in the clouds. We want patterns because patterns are good. This is a bad pattern. And even though that square is ever so slightly out of whack with the rest of the series, we immediately gravitate towards it because it's different. Humans like different, but we also like consistency. It's one of the weird things. Humans, very, very complex creatures. So here we go. Triangles, circles, and squares. This is one of my favorite representations of how we can use color, position, series, connections in our dome. It's amazing how your mind will do this without you thinking about it. This is a blank canvas for people to look at. They are trying to make decisions about which pattern is most important. Is the series of triangles the most important? Is it the columns that we see? I don't know. Are these supposed to be together? Are they three separate? Let's introduce. Now we have a peach circle. That circle is the most important circle that's ever existed in the history of humans because it stands out. That's all we want to focus on. But now if I make one triangle peach and one square peach, what your mind immediately jumps to is the conclusion that these three objects, which have zero actual connection to one another, must be connected because they share a similar characteristic. They don't. We just arbitrarily made that decision. Then, if I were to make every other column peach, now your mind says, okay, the most important pattern is the blue, orange, blue, orange, blue, orange, blue. By far, that's the most important thing. And then if I flip that triangle, oh my God, all hell breaks loose because now that's by far the single most important thing there. How we make patterns and keep consistency between the objects that we're showing people. Again, this is getting them to tell the story subconsciously so that we don't have to. So the way that we use color, the way that we use these patterns is what's going to allow us all of these distinct storytelling opportunities. So keep that in mind as you're making stuff on the dome. The opposite side of this is when we put something on the dome that feels out of place, that feels wrong. This is the idea of cognitive interference. It is going against all of the things that we instinctually know, or all of the things of which we have incredible context around. Fine example of this is a red go and a green stop. We know that red means stop, but we know that GO means go, and vice versa on the green stop sign. The interference here is that you cannot decide which of these aspects of the visualization you need to listen to. Do I stop on the red go, or do I go because it says go? Like, it's completely up to me to tell you which way. The key here is that you have now stopped someone in their tracks. They are so cognitively interfered, they cannot progress to understand more. So we have to make sure that what we're putting up on the dome, that the visualizations we make are in line with many of the cultural contexts that we build our shows inside of. Same thing here. This just, it feels wrong. Black should not be yellow. So if you were to, if I told you, I would like you to read each of the colors, first by the letters that you see, red, orange, gray, purple, blue, black, yellow, magenta, that's easy because letters tell a specific story. That's a word. Now I need to go and tell you what those colors are that the letters are. Blue, dark blue, gray, and there it is. It's supposed to be red, but I said gray because my mind wants to read what is least interfered. So this is, again, an extreme example, but we don't want to make these mistakes when we have our audiences in the dome. We don't want to bring interference into the dome so that we give them more time to understand what we're doing. And so as we're wrapping up, I want to get some rules for visual storytelling, primarily guidelines, but these are the things to keep in mind as we are producing content for our domes that works everywhere for everyone. First, while we may think that we are the planetarium, that only thing that matters is what we think things should look like up on the dome, you are creating your content for other people, no matter what. So first thing to keep in mind is, how would other people perceive and interpret what I have created? And oftentimes it's going to be a pretty good thing. It's going to be right in line with what you're hoping. But if you forget this, everything else falls away. To reiterate that point, I'm going to change the color. And now you're like, oh, the color's changed. That means it must be important. If I move this around the slide, it would also impart some importance here. But again, you are creating this for other people. Remember that, build up from it. Second, simple explanations. Do not simplify your ideas. If you look at a visualization and you think to yourself, this is too simple, it takes away too much nuance, step back, remember you're creating it for other people, and remember that we can very simply explain things, but still have sophisticated understandings of what is behind that. The simple explanations and the simple visualizations are what get people in the door, that helps to reset the context we're working in and allows us to move into those deeper and in some cases more complicated aspects of the ideas and the stories that we're telling. Pictures, always remember, better than words, which is ironic that you are reading a slide telling you that pictures are better than words. So instead, Big Daddy from Little Star. Has nothing to do with this presentation, but you will remember that somehow, like the 1980s version of Mike Smale, once again, Mike, if you're watching this later, sideburnned Mike Smale is now in the middle of this planetarium session. I've now made a contextual point, constructed a memory point that we can use for our audiences in the future. May not necessarily use something like this, but remember, if you've got pictures and you have constructs that allow you to tell the story and let people remember things, they're going to walk out with a better understanding. And one of the great sort of overall guidelines for this sort of visual storytelling is that get it to work first, then we can make it look good. We can make it look simple. Get the point across that you want, step back and look how we can shape the form. If something looks good, but it doesn't tell any story, it is useless. It doesn't matter how good something is if you don't know how to use it. Make something that you know you can use, and then try to make that as effective a visual storytelling tool as you can. So what isn't said says a lot. What you don't put on the dome, what you don't visualize, is as often as powerful a storytelling tool as what you do put on the dome. And so you make these decisions. This is what I want to visualize. This is what I want to include. But you can also look at that and say, well, if I don't include spaghettification in a talk about black holes, and I'm talking to 8th graders, I know damn well that an 8th grader is going to come up to me after the show and ask, why didn't we talk about spaghettification? Because you're knowing your audience and you're knowing about the things that they anticipate and expect to happen. And when we withhold that, when we produce visuals and stories that don't 100% match the expectations, here we go. Now we're pulling people in. We're providing a way for them to interact with us that isn't even a direct interaction. And that's exciting. That's ways for us to build sophistication into our shows and our visualizations. Again, no matter what the style that we're using. And with that, love to do some Q&A. I saw some in the chat. Jeff, I'm going to hit up your question first, but Alan, at the very least, thank you all for having me this afternoon, and a pleasure to be part of the PPA seminar this week.
I think a round of applause is appropriate here. Yeah, that was great.
Thank you, everybody.
Very interesting. And I'm going to switch over to gallery view, see who's here.
But Jeff, to your point, Jeff's question was, what would you say is a typical time that you spend between form and function? It often depends on the complexity of the visualization that you would want to make. And again, when we're talking about complex visualizations, it's not necessarily, I have a 1 billion data point data set that I have to somehow get in the dome. This is, I want to tell a story. The story has 1 or 2 possible answers. The story has 10 or 20 possible answers. And what I would usually do is like a 75-25 split between function and form. And the more that we start thinking about what the end form will be, it will educate more and more of how we build the functionality in the first place. So instead of having to go back and make drastic changes, this is just something that's getting rolled into the way that you approach your visual storytelling every single time that you create something new. But again, if you're going to lean, if you have to lean on one side of that fence or the other, you always want to lean on, does it tell a good story? Then we can worry about, does it tell that story visually really well? The heart of the matter is you want your audiences to understand. And if it's like pretty good visualization, but they get it, well, now you have a tool that you can go back and continue to make better, but knowing that your baseline is a competent and useful asset for your shows.
I have a comment.
Feel free to unmute if you want to ask a question. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I have a comment on the opposites being confusing, but I've used them to advantage, I think, because at least they're intuitive. So when I'm teaching about star temperatures, I'll key into that. And I've told thousands of kids this, when you go home tonight, look at the bathroom sink when you're brushing your teeth. The red means hot water, but you'll know and you'll remember when you look at the bathroom sink, and I do my scarecrow impersonation, that it's the opposite, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's opportunity to enlighten people, and yeah, far easier than dealing with the arbitrary ones.
Exactly.
But thanks. This has been a really rich presentation.
Glad you enjoyed it.
I might mention, if anybody came in late and you didn't sign in, our sign-in sheet is the chat, so you can type, like I'm going to do mine again. If you came in late, just put your name and where you're from. Michael, I really like the at the very end where you said what you don't put up can be as important. And however, there's an assumption there that people will really notice what you haven't put up, and that could kind of go past them. So is there a strategy, like for instance, you might call attention to and ask a question like, what is missing here? If you have a visualization that has left something out, I think you could overt the question.
When I did a lot of the school age shows at Seminole, back when Derek and I were working together, that was always a really powerful tool. And even like at the kindergarten and first grade level, you could find things where they know in some cases like what should come next. It's like if you talked about the numbers 1, 2, and 4. And then why didn't you talk about why 3 is next? Why didn't you talk about it? That's the sort of like very base level sort of thing. But for the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th grade shows, we'd go, you'd visit the planets, and they're savvy enough, they've seen enough where it's like, all right, Venus is hot, and Mars has mountains and a canyon, and Saturn has rings. And if I wanted to pull interactivity maybe that wasn't necessarily there right away, I could then pinpoint the sorts of things that if I didn't talk about them, some kid would bring it up, and now they've broken the ice. They've like reset the dome social contract, and I've accepted that. That would be a fun seminar for the future, like, you know, the philosophy of interactions in the dome. But that would be a way that I could pull certain groups out, and then all of a sudden you've transformed the entire tenor of the show, because they thought something was so egregiously omitted that they had to speak up. And then when they did speak up, it was a positive experience for them. And then they would continue to be part of that interactivity. You know, a little different if it's a pre-recorded show or it's a show that has lots of scripted elements. But it was always something that I would bring up. It was the audible in a show rather than something that was being planned beforehand. But it oftentimes would get the sort of reactions that I was looking for. Like, okay, we've broken this group, and now they want to talk to us, which is great.
We continue to build upon our heritage.
Cool. And any other questions?
No, I'll go again since nobody else is speaking up, because this whole point that the audience doesn't get overwhelmed. I had a personal experience that kind of caused me to prepare audiences for shows where there'll be a lot of visuals and perhaps ones that have fewer, to have realistic expectations. What happened to me as I went to the opening, well, the first time I went to the new Cal Academy, there's an art museum across the way, and I went to this Impressionist art show. And I was able to walk through that show at my own pace, and I'm pretty slow. And then what I always do at art shows is I go back and connect with the paintings that kind of I felt were really connected to, and it's like revisit them and just take my own time. And then I went across the street and I watched this planetarium show. I was like bombarded by images and Jodie Foster speaking for 20 minutes straight without a pause. And it's like, oh my God, this is way too much. So yeah, I think it's really, really important to set people's expectations for what they're going to see at times, especially if it's on one side or the other. If they may be expecting some whiz bang thing and you're just going to do a star tour as opposed to a more modern one with a lot of visualizations.
It is the reason why, and I don't think we have any laserists on the call, but it's the reason that laser shows work, because we can take in this immense amount of visual stimulus, but that's all we have to decode. And because it's abstract in many, many cases, we don't have to distinguish the story, because what do we have for context? Oh, I've listened to Dark Side of the Moon 50 times. Or I know all the Led Zeppelin songs, and I don't have to decode that. I am not decoding Jimmy Page's guitar solo. So I get to have the context that this beautiful visual stimulus sits on top of. So now I can spend my time focusing on the visuals because I'm already there with the audio. When we're in a planetarium show where you don't know what the presenter is going to say, you don't necessarily know where that story is going, you're always on that. We have to bring that stimulus down. So like you said, if you've got 25 minutes of somebody talking at you in a dome with visuals that are equally as stimulating, you walk out and you can be overwhelmed. Of course, the same thing can happen as if you've seen the same planetarium show 40 times and you've contextualized the audio and the visual, and then you find yourself falling asleep because now you don't have to decode it. And now you're just in a nice dark room with things that feel familiar to you. And then you wake up 15 minutes later and people are walking out of the dome because you forgot to shut off the show. It's something that we've all experienced, and it's something that we can take advantage of. Live shows that go slow and have pauses, and there's movement in the sky, and maybe you don't talk during the movement, but you are the person who brings the audience along in the journey between these experiences. Like, those are the shows people walk out of and go, wow, that was transcendent. I learned so much and it was so beautiful. Well, it's because you had time to understand and decode all of it. And as the presenter, we have an incredible amount of control over how that experience is portrayed.
Seems like might it be a kind of a hard thing to gauge, and it depends on the audience, like how much of a barrage or a thrilling visual experience you have, as opposed to a milder and contemplative thing. Some kids or some people really want that barrage, and that's what makes them excited. And other people really want the quieter, contemplative environment. So how do you choose which way to go?
It's a great question. I think the easy cop-out answer, especially in a room, a lot of us have been in like the LIPS environment for a long time and had those sorts of discussions, or we've built our careers off of the live and interactive side of thing, in which like sometimes you don't know, and sometimes it's multiple, like the same show could be multiple styles of delivery, because we're trying to adapt to people in real time. Again, going back to the school age shows where we're flying around the solar system, and I'm flying live, and you can slow it down, and it's like we're just parked in orbit around Saturn, and it's this really simple, beautiful orbit, and that could be where there's like a little bit of a lull for some of the people in the audience, but now we can give you all of this amazing information auditorily that maybe you needed. And then you go to Mars, and it's a little less talking, but it's a lot more visual stimulus. We're flying into Valles Marineris and over Olympus Mons, and we're able to go down and see a rover or something. There's a lot going on, and being able, I've found in most cases, to be able to go back and forth between those is enough to keep audiences happy and coming back. But Alan, you're 100% right. It's like, if all you ever did was show planetarium shows with 30 minutes of straight narration and like a ridiculous amount of animation, and that's all you'd ever showed, it's why people walk out of shows after 15 minutes. It's like, it's too much and I can't take it and I'm out of here. And if you want to have a contemplative show where it's, you might say 100 words, but people feel the, as the kids would say today, the vibes are right in the dome. I think that's the beauty of the live side of it, is being able to make those calls on the fly, but also in what we do and in the visualizations that we make, providing enough different experiences for enough different types of audiences so that everybody gets something, and makes them feel, the ones that want contemplative, hey, you might enjoy a little fun and frenetic. And those that like fun and frenetic, hey, maybe you'll like a little bit of contemplative when we bring those people together. Tim Barry, I know, I have no idea why, when I was talking about fun and frenetic, I went right to you. Wanted to make, eye contact here for fun and frenetic, Tim Barry.
Well,
It worked.
I have a question, but I don't know if I should ask it because, I'm an architect. I'm not a filmmaker or a real science teacher, but so why are we still paying attention to the sweet spot? Aren't we in a new round hemisphere? Can we throw away all those old rules about visual interference and sound? To me, I think we have an opportunity to do something different. And I know my only job is to make the seating work, among other things. But I mean, I think really concentric and center point, there's a whole world to explore, I think, but I'm not a filmmaker. I'd love to hear from the rest of everyone else.
It's a wonderful thing.
I mean, I enjoy putting stuff up on behind the dome, behind people, and especially if it's a school group, and having the kids try to find it. It's like, oh, do you see this? It's like, have them look around. Have them become active, right? And don't put it where they're expecting it to be.
Yeah. Putting something at the zenith when you're in a concentric dome. Okay, that can make sense. But if you think about our original concentric domes, those weren't slide projectors and video projectors. You could do concentric because the entire sky was the canvas of the story. And if you're in a unidirectional dome, especially a flat one, and you put something at the zenith, like, it feels weird. Now it can be extremely immersive. I think it can be a really powerful storytelling tool, but if you're in that sort of dome and all you're doing is looking up, like, it feels off. It feels uncomfortable. If that was 30 minutes of that, if it was 30 seconds of that, then all you're doing is resetting those expectations in real time with your audience. And now it's like, oh, I pushed something to the zenith. Now they're starting to understand, well, something could be on the side, or something could be behind me, or the movement could come from behind me rather than from in front. I could be enveloped by a planet rather than just simply running into it. And I think as filmmaker, I'm Mary, you're here. I'm thinking about sort of like Ryan Wyatt, sort of the way that Cal Academy produces shows. If a producer, if a content creator wants to take those risks, we should be all power to them. It's that we need to do this. We would be upending decades of best practices. Tim, I think this is a fine example of that. They're best practices because that's what's been easiest for people to create. Can we take risks to try new positioning, new movements to create a more immersive space? Absolutely. We just need, again, it's where the live and interactive side comes in. Live shows, it's a lot easier to figure out and try new things. If it doesn't work, you don't do it again. Instead of having committed, 7 figures worth of money into producing content. It's something where I think there's a huge opportunity for sort of live planetarium presentations to positively influence the creation of full dome content. And then for full dome content and those sort of cinematic ideals to positively influence the way that we do live shows.
I mean, that's the way my head works is, you've introduced some new rules to me, and it's like, oh, how can I break these and use them creatively? So, that one with the box, it's 1 degree skew. It's like, you could use that to make a really, really good point with people, and, wait for them to discover it themselves. And, hey, what's the deal with that? And then give them a reason.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you've alluded to it actually in your earlier points about how we home in on motion, like totally. And so the way to make the whole dome become your canvas is to use motion of things in ways that draw people's attention away from the sweet spot. If I think that's what Tim is getting at, and that would be a strategy to use to make things move, the full dome animation, not just focusing on the sweet spot.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those, I think one of the distinct opportunities for sort of upending best practices as we think of them today is in the portable planetarium, because you can do anything in that space with how people are situated. Do you want them facing one direction? Do you want them facing east instead of due south? Like, why do we start shows in the south or the north? Because that's the way we've always done them. You go out in the real sky, you don't necessarily want, initially point yourself towards south. I mean, you get there, you put your planisphere above your head, and now you can see things. But, you're in this very small and intimate space. That feels like a wholly untapped canvas for dome storytelling is the mobile space. To be able to take risks in that location and try new things and bring that to the larger, the fixed conventional planetarium world. It's another opportunity for that exchange of ideas and for those conversations to happen, so that now we have content that seems to work across multiple planetarium styles and presentation styles and sizes and shapes. Who knows for the future? It bring more people in the conversation, bring more creators to the table, and let's tell better stories.
Jeff Nee put a question, 2 questions.
Release your visual. Most of the visuals, older visuals, would still be with Derek down at Seminole State. He's slowly going to be taking most of that and converting those into Digistar format now that the dome has been upgraded. What I'm creating now is usually done in Digistar conferences and presentations and that sort. So especially if you are a Digistar site and have access to the Digistar cloud, I've got a lot of visualizations that I've built that are up there. But that's really why I wanted to do this sort of presentation in the first place, is to make it as agnostic to system and technology and time, really, as possible, and allow for, I wouldn't say a standardization of visualization, but that we can have these conversations as content creators and not as content creators who just happen to use a certain system or style of digital or slide projector days. We're not too far removed for some of us, and making sure that we can have these conversations with as broad a part of the community as possible. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
I think we're getting close to wrap up. It's getting close to dinner time for some people, bedtime or nap time for other people. So again, thank you very much, Michael.
Very well.